I'm a teacher, and this incident occurred a couple of years back. It was during my 4th year of teaching at the high school where I still work. I teach math and had 4 different classes that semester, which kept me very busy between teaching, preparing lessons, and grading assignments. One day, about a month into the school year, I was teaching like any other day. It was the first hour, and I was in the middle of explaining a problem on the whiteboard when the phone rang in my classroom. I paused and walked over to answer it. I was informed that the school was being locked down, but no reason was given. Shortly after, the announcement was made over the school intercom. Some of my students began asking what the lockdown was for, but I honestly didn't know. I did what I was supposed to do. Turned off the lights, locked the doors, and instructed the students to move to the back of the classroom. There were 20 kids in my class, and although they complied, they were still curious about the reason for the lockdown. I knew it wasn't a drill and was pretty curious myself. I went to my desk and sat down. Minutes passed, which felt like forever. After about 10 minutes, my cell phone started vibrating. It was on my desk, and I picked it up to see who was calling. The number was unfamiliar, and though I was about to ignore it, I thought it might be information about the lockdown. Maybe from another teacher or a staff member whose number I didn't have yet. So, at the last minute, I answered the call. A man's voice, which I didn't recognize, spoke professionally, instructing me to go to the principal's office immediately. When I asked why, he said it would be explained when I got there. I was very confused and said I couldn't leave my class, but he insisted I go anyway before hanging up. My students were watching me, no doubt wondering what the call was about. One of them asked, and I told them the truth. Someone had asked me to go to the principal's office, and I didn't know why. I was debating whether to go or not. I got up, walked to the door, and looked out into the hallway. It was empty, but then I saw someone, just barely in my line of sight. A man was standing there, dressed in all black, including a ski mask. I quickly moved back after seeing him. One of the students asked if I was going to go, and I said no. I instructed everyone to stay at the back of the class and joined them. I had no idea who the person in the hallway was, but the ski mask was a bad sign. They were likely the reason for the lockdown. I didn't want my students to know how close the person was. Everything was silent for a few minutes. We couldn't hear anything from the hallway. Felt like forever, and the longer we waited, the more worried I became. My phone rang again with the same number, but I ignored it. When they called back again, I turned off my phone entirely. We stayed in the classroom for almost an hour. Finally, the classroom phone rang. I picked it up and was told the lockdown was over, followed by an announcement over the intercom. I let the students out. Later, I learned more details about the lockdown. The person in the ski mask was a former student of the high school and of mine, whom I had failed. He had returned to the school and was the one who called my cell phone. I'm not sure how he got my number, but he did. He was trying to lure me out of the classroom, possibly to attack me. I don't like to think about it. Fortunately, a faculty member spotted him, triggering the lockdown. Eventually, the police arrived and caught him, though he managed to evade them for a while. I still can't believe it to this day. I can't imagine what would have happened if I had left the classroom. It seemed too strange, and I never seriously considered leaving. I could tell something was suspicious. I'll never forget seeing him in the hallway. It was one of the scariest sights of my life.
This incident occurred when I was in high school. For some context, I'm a female and was a junior at the time. I used to walk to and from school every day since I lived quite close, typically taking around 10 to 15 minutes. The route was mostly sidewalks. One morning, I left home at my usual time of about 7:30 a.m. since school started at 7:50. After stepping out of my house with my backpack, I noticed a car parked on the side of the street, right in front of the sidewalk where I would walk past. I had never seen it before, so I didn't recognize who it might belong to. I intended to walk right past it, but as I approached, the passenger side window began to roll down, and someone inside said something. The car was an older dark gray BMW, and the driver was a young-looking guy, but he seemed slightly older than me. He asked if I needed a ride to school. I had never seen this guy before and didn't think he attended my school. He introduced himself as Ryan, I think, though I can't remember exactly, and mentioned he went to a school in the next city over. He claimed to be friends with Erica, one of my best friends, and said he was on his way to pick her up, offering to give me a ride as well. I declined, feeling it was weird since Erica had never mentioned this guy before. He asked why not, and I said maybe some other time. I wanted to confirm with Erica if she knew him at all, though it was suspicious. The guy seemed disappointed but ultimately said okay, and drove off after passing me. As I continued walking to school, I texted Erica about it. That semester, my first hour class was English, and by the time I got to class, I had a response from her. We usually didn't see each other before school since our classes were on opposite ends. Erica said she had no idea who I was talking about, which confirmed my suspicions. During that first hour English class, about 30 minutes in, the school went into a lockdown. We had never had a lockdown before, only drills. Our teacher told us to sit at the back of the class, turned off the lights, and locked the door. We sat in silence for what felt like a long time, but it was probably only about 20 minutes before the lockdown was lifted. By the end of the day, I found out that a man had walked into the school after classes started, bypassing the receptionist. The only open door after classes began was the front door. A hall monitor saw him and asked for a pass, but he ignored and walked into the locker commons, hiding there. The school was locked down, but he managed to run to the nearest exit and escape. The school and property were searched, but he had vanished, likely into the large woods behind the school. After school, I walked home as usual. Less than halfway there, I saw the same car from that morning. I got a bad feeling as I noticed it was parked on the side of the road again, in my path. I sped up, but as I approached, the guy said something, his window already down. He greeted me, and I kept walking, saying hi back. He then told me to stop, which I ignored. Then he said, "You know, I was in your school earlier." I stopped, stunned by his words. He began to laugh creepily, bragging about how he had caused the lockdown and escaped. He opened his car door and got out, and I started walking faster. When he began to run, I had to run too. He was gaining on me, so I left the sidewalk and ran into the road. Then, in one of the luckiest moments of my life, a car came down the otherwise quiet street. I ran straight for it and recognized the driver. It was Matt, a classmate. He saw me and stopped, and I ran to the passenger side. The man chasing me was about 20 feet behind. I got in, told Matt to lock the doors, and the guy reached the car, trying to get in and pounding on the door when he couldn't. Matt asked who the guy was, and I told him to just drive. He did, leaving the man in the street. I explained everything to Matt and called the police. They came out to talk to me and my parents, saying they'd look for the car I described. That same day, the police found the man. He had been stalking me for several days without my knowledge. He wasn't a student, he was in his mid-20s, and I'm not sure why he entered the school, maybe waiting for me to return to my locker. This happened years ago, but I still think about it often. I'm grateful Matt was there when he was. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't been.
One seemingly average Thursday, I was in school, attending my third-hour history class. As a senior, I really enjoyed this class because the teacher, Mr. Smith, was very laid back. He often gave us plenty of time to do our homework during class, so we rarely had any to take home. Typically, he would teach for a bit at the beginning, and then the rest of the class turned into a study hall where we could talk, work, and even use our phones or listen to music. On this particular day, it was a normal class period. I had my headphones in as I studied, and I managed to finish my assignment early. I often joked around with Mr. Smith, as did other students. After turning in my assignment, he asked if I wanted to do him a favor by returning some iPads to another teacher. We had used them the previous day for a group assignment. There were about 10 iPads in a carrying case, and I was happy to have something to do outside of class. He wrote me a pass and I took the iPad case. I left the classroom with my headphones in and unpaused my music as I walked through the empty hallways to the other teacher's classroom. There were probably about 15 minutes left of class. When I reached the classroom, I found the door locked and all the lights were off. Seemed odd, but I assumed the teacher didn't have a class during that hour. So, I turned around and started heading back to my classroom. About halfway back, I saw something ahead where two hallways intersected. I noticed a man I didn't recognize, who clearly wasn't a teacher or staff member. I only saw him for a second as he passed from one hallway to another, not looking in my direction. The issue was he was walking towards my classroom. I continued walking but stopped when I reached the intersection, looking down the hallway. I saw the man again, near my classroom, appearing to search for something. Feeling uneasy, I turned and walked in the opposite direction, taking out my headphones. Everything was silent. After wandering the empty hallways for about 5 minutes, I thought the man might be gone and started heading back to my class. When I returned to the hallway where I last saw him, he was no longer there. Relieved, I began walking towards my class, but then I heard footsteps behind me, coming from around the corner. I quickly ducked into a nearby bathroom, not wanting to be seen. I initially just waited inside, but as the footsteps got closer, I moved into a stall. The man passed by without entering the bathroom. After waiting a bit longer, I peeked out and saw him far down the hallway near my class. I quickly left the bathroom and tried to walk away quietly. Unfortunately, I must have made some noise because I heard movement behind me. I looked back and saw the man looking right at me, then he started walking towards me. He was still quite far, at least 100 feet away, so I walked as fast as I could, taking another hallway. By this point, I just wanted to get away from him or out of the school. I walked quickly down the hallway, took a left, and headed towards the stairs to go down to the first floor. As I approached, I heard someone coming up the stairs. I stopped, unsure of who it could be. When the person came into view, I saw it was a police officer. He asked what I was doing and I asked what was happening. He told me the school was under lockdown and they were searching for a suspicious man. I pointed him in the direction I last saw the man, then went downstairs and encountered several more officers. I showed them my student ID and was directed to a nearby classroom to wait until the lockdown was over. It lasted about 15 more minutes before it ended, and we were let out. By then, it was time for the next class period. I never found out who the man was or what he was doing there. I also don't know how he got into our school. I hadn't heard about the lockdown because my headphones were in. Looking back, if I had known, I would have tried to get into any classroom. I'm just glad I didn't have to find out what would have happened if that guy had caught up with me.